Before we can really get started digging into the tax code, we need to understand a little bit of the basics about how things are organized, how they get put into the code, and what exactly a USC and a CFR actually is. So we can think of a USC as a code that got put into the books on the federal government's law. And it's the primary part that the politicians and the legislators put into the code to say that here's a new law. But sometimes when those codes get put in, they're not exactly clear as to what they're talking about. And I'm going to give you an example here just to kind of show you how this works. And so what ends up happening is for some of those areas of the code where things might not be clear for the taxpayer in this particular case, they'll come out with a CFR where the director will come in and they'll clarify some aspect of the code and what it actually meant when it said something. And so what I want to do is, and constantly as we go through this, you're going to be seeing me go from CFRs to USC code. So we'll start usually with the USC to see what it says, and then we'll jump over to the CFR to see if there's any extra information over there. Now, there is another aspect of this that you've got to keep in mind is that in relation to the tax code, we also have treasury decisions, and they're called TDs. And in these TDs, it's where you can think of it as the director, or the secretary, the person that's in charge of all of this madness. They'll go out and they'll post clarifying arguments or clarifying positions of the IRS and try to provide more information as to what is going on when you start looking at the tax code. Because one of the things that you're going to realize really quickly is that it's madness. It is extremely hard to understand what they're saying. And if you think it's written that way because it's a complex subject, you would be wrong. It is written that way purely to disgruntle anyone that attempts the madness of going in here and trying to decipher what is actually being said. But in this course, we are going to walk through and see exactly what is being said and whether or not we are actually responsible for any of this code or whether it's some other person or fiction that exists out in the world. So before we get started, let's go ahead and jump in here to the USC and kind of take a look at how things are organized and the way things look. And so I'm going to jump over here to the USC, and you'll see here Title 26 is the entirety of the income tax and more, but it's all related to taxation. And so when you want to know anything that you're liable for, or you want to see if your CPA or your tax attorney is giving you good information, you would go to Title 26 to find the regulation or the rule that they're supposedly following. Okay. So Title 26, if we look at just on the very base level, we have subtitles, and subtitle A is your income tax section. Subtitle C is your employment taxes, so where you actually have a job and your employer is taking out taxes. And then subtitle F contains all your procedure and administrative stuff. Those are the only sections that we're really going to be paying much attention to because most of the other stuff doesn't have anything to do with us. Now, there is a subtitle B for estate and gift taxes, but I think as we proceed through this, you're going to kind of realize that none of this actually applies to us. And so you can take it and go dig into it if you want to. I'm not going to spend much time in estate and gift taxes because I don't deal with that. All right, so let's take a look at income taxes. So we're going to click on subtitle A, and again, we're in the USC. And in here, we've got only a few sections. We've got normal taxes, we got tax on self-employment, and then we've got withholding of tax on non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. The rest of this is, and we also have Chapter 4, which is reporting on certain foreign accounts, which is more banking, I think. But the primary three things that we're going to be taking a look at are Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3. 2A is kind of not important to us, so we're going to skip it. All right, so let's jump into chapter 1 and let's see what's in here. So the first thing in chapter 1 is we've got subchapters in there. So we've got subchapter A, B, C, D. And if you look at this, we have subchapter A, which is determination of tax liability. And then subchapter B tells you how to calculate those taxes. And then you've got some corporate stuff here, accounting periods, subchapter F, exempt organizations, banking. So if you look down through here, the majority of this stuff really doesn't have anything to do with us. We're really interested in determining our tax liability, subchapter B for computation and taxable income, and probably maybe E, and I'd say maybe E. But again, we're going to get into this later on. Right now, I want to look at determination of tax liability, and so we're going to go there. And then we're going to take a look at tax on individuals, because that would be us, right? We're individuals and we want to know what our tax liability is. So we're going to go into the individuals, and in here we have some specific things, and we're going to be digging into this in more depth later. The primary thing that we're wanting to look at right now is why do we have CFRs and USCs and what do they mean? So we're going to look at section 1, tax imposed. And you'll notice in here that it's the tax imposed, but it is kind of weird because it immediately jumps in here for married individuals filing joint returns and surviving spouses. And you'll notice it says there is hereby imposed on the taxable income. So the very first thing that you should kind of key in on is that obviously there's some kind of income that is not taxable, because this is only imposed on taxable income, and we'll get into this as we go. But you'll notice it's pretty clear. It says every married individual, as defined in 7703, which is basically just telling you how to determine if you're married or not, who makes a single return jointly with his spouse under section 6013, and every spouse a tax determined in accordance with the following table. So it goes through and gives you a table. So it looks like it covers everybody in the world when it says this, every married individual. There's no limitations. So someone in France should have to pay this tax. Well, we know that's not true. So obviously there's something here that is going to give us a little bit more information than what this says, because this is extremely unclear as to not only what type of income we're talking about, but where and who we're talking about, like who actually owes this particular tax. And so let's take a look at the related CFR. So we've acknowledged the USC lacks a lot of information. So let's take a look at the CFR, which is supposed to give us more information. And so you'll notice here that it's kind of in the same layout. There's not as much detail here because CFRs don't exist for every single piece of code that you have in the USC. It only exists for places where they think there needs to be a little bit better explanation, or they're hiding things. And so let's take a look at subchapter A, which is income tax. And then in here we have part 1, which is income taxes. And then in here we have income tax on individuals. So you'll notice this is 1.1-1, which relates to the code that we actually just looked at. And so we're going to click on it, and you'll notice in here, income tax on individuals. If I flip back over here to this guy, tax imposed, but it was income tax on individuals. So if we go back here, tax on individuals. So it's broken down a little bit differently, but here's 1, and then you got your dot, and then your 1-1. And so let's go back over here. And so this says Section 1 of the code, so sections are the individual codes. So when you see section 6331, for example, that is the actual number associated with the law or the code that you're actually referencing. So when it says section 1, that is USC section 1. And it says section 1 of the code imposes an income tax on the income of every individual who is a citizen or resident of the United States and to the extent provided in 871 and 877 on the income of non-resident alien individuals. Okay, so where the code itself jumped right into whether you're married or not married and joint and filing single, all that stuff, the CFR tells you that it's actually only related to United States citizens and residents. Now, what is a resident? So a United States citizen is, and I'm going to clarify this, and if you haven't already watched the 14th Amendment section, you can go back and watch it. But the resident is a alien that is here in the country and is working, but they have a green card, or they've got something, or I'm sorry, not a green card. Well, it could be a green card, but they have permission to live here. So it's a little bit confusing, to be honest with you, when you get into it, because a non-resident alien is someone that fits 877 and 871. And if you're a non-resident alien, wouldn't that mean you're not residing in the United States? And therefore, how would the government tax you in the first place? So it's a little bit weird. We'll get into it and it'll make a little bit more sense as we go. But the big point here is that USC's are the actual laws. That's what actually got passed. And the CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations, and that's what comes along behind the actual codes to define or to give guidance into specifically what it is the law is actually talking about. And they go hand in hand. There are not always CFRs to define what you're looking at in the code, but there are obviously always codes. So if you can't determine what you're talking about in a code, then you try to find it in the CFR. If you can't find it there, and this is only related to the IRS, but if you can't find it there, you can go and try to find it in a TD, in a Treasury decision. Or in other tax code that exist. And you'll see some of this as we go. It is an extremely complicated set of things to understand. It is very, very complex. The only thing that I can say is kudos to the people that actually wrote this mess, because if you were trying to do something illegal and confuse the hell out of everybody that was actually reading it, you did a good job, because this is some artwork. But now that you know what the difference is between a USC and a CFR, let's dig in a little bit deeper and see what's actually being said here.